So we're talking about the smallest amino acid. It has the biggest job. It's got a structural role, right? It's 25% of collagen weight, in our skin, our joints, our tendons, our gut. You were talking about that biochemical role, building block for proteins, DNA, creatine, glutathione, bile acids. But also there is an electrochemical role, and I learned about
Yeah.
it in
Oh,
your
yeah.
book.
That's what I was getting to. Yeah.
Yes, so
Yes.
take us. What's the
Its main
electrochemical
role,
role? Yeah.
the main reason it helps people, and it's that the deficiency is so destructive, has to do with its role as a bulk constituent of plasma, not even as a building block of protein, and that is because of a role that's not biochemical. See, that's where I say I have specialty in physiology, immunology, and biochemistry. So I talked about the biochemistry of glycine, how it's made, and what it participates in, and why you end up being deficient in it. But its role in physiology and immunology is really where it's key. So the physiology is that it has a physiological function at the surface of the cell, especially the immune cells called macrophages, which are the cells that do inflammation. Those cells, just like many other cells, they are activated by electrochemical switching systems. It's an electrochemical switch at the surface of the cell on the cell membrane that actually turns the cell on in really a strictly analogous way to the way a light switch on the wall will turn a light on. So you have a light switch on the wall, let's say the light is off. So there are two electrical poles on that switch. Well, one of them is connected to the electricity, right? So that's hot. And then the other one is cold unless you turn the switch on, right? So the potential, voltage is another way of saying electrical potential. It's called voltage. So the voltage between the two poles of a switch on your wall is what? Everybody knows 120 volts. And what happens when you turn the switch on? When you turn the switch on or close the switch, close the contact, now the two poles are connected. What's the potential difference between the two poles? Zero. And what does it do? It activates the light. Now the current is flowing through the light and it's illuminating the room. The cells that do inflammation are not activated to do inflammation unless they get an electrochemical signal that actually flips the voltage at the cell surface from its resting potential to zero. Well, its resting potential is not 120 volts. It gets higher than that if you're an electric eel, but we don't get into that. That's a very specialized kind of biological situation. But just your ordinary cells, like your nervous system, the resting potential is about 0.07 volts, 70 millivolts. Small voltage, but for a cell that's critical. Now, when a macrophage is called to the scene of a crime or wherever there is damage, cell death, damaged cells are dying, there's some kind of injury or some kind of infection, the macrophages come along and they get activated to what's called an M2 stage, where what they do is they just clean up the mess. Like little amoebas, they'll go around and they'll clean up the mess, and that's all they'll do, as a prelude to healing, for healing to go on. However, if there is an actual infection, they are activated to another level. In that other level, they will actually initiate inflammation and inflammatory reaction. They'll start secreting all kinds of poisons in an effort to kill whatever microbe got into you before it kills you. You got to kill it before it kills you. So that's what what the macrophages do if they are so activated. Now, in the act of being quiescent or in an M2 stage or a resting stage, just from the ordinary action of going around, acting like an amoeba and stuff like that, there's a lot of maneuvering of the cell membrane, a lot of changes. It's a very dynamic system. In that dynamic movement in the life of a cell, there's going to be a lot of leakage of ions. Some ions will leak in, some will leak out. And the importance is that there's a stable equilibrium between the inside and the outside of the cell. There's not the same concentration of each ion, but the same overall balance is there. But each ion will be different. So for example, sodium ions are very high outside the cell in concentration, but very low inside. Potassium ions, the opposite. Chloride ions, also very high outside the cell, right? The blood plasma, sodium chloride. The main salt in there, sodium ions and chloride ions. So chloride ions also high outside the cell, but inside the cell, no. Chloride ions are very low. So now you have a potential, because of the balance of sodium and potassium and chloride and the other ions, the resting potential is about minus 70 millivolts from the inside to the outside. So the inside is negatively charged relative to the outside. So if you have a little channel, little pores They're called ion channels. That ions can diffuse through selectively without having to expend any energy. They can be allowed to leak in. Then you can stabilize things if you allow chloride, for example, to leak in. That means it maintains a more negative concentration inside the cell than outside. So it tends to keep the membrane polarized or even hyperpolarized so that it's negative, more negative than 70 millivolts inside relative to outside. Now, from all of that movement, or from and then just from the movement of being activated to an M1, what I call the mend mode, clean up the mess mode, rather than the rend mode where they're actually secreting poisons and doing inflammation. Just from the more quiescent activity there, the non-inflammatory mode, you will get some leakage, and that membrane potential of 70 millivolts will tend to deteriorate just from leakage. And so it's very prone to be activated, because if that deteriorates, it goes down to zero. Now you get a depolarization, a big influx of calcium, which is a major switching system, and then it switches into the M1 mode. If you have enough glycine around, that doesn't happen. Why? Because the chloride channels, which allow chloride in. Chloride is a negative ion. It's high on the outside, low on the inside. So if you have a channel that selectively allows chloride to come in, that keeps up the voltage, which keeps the switch off. But these chloride channels are actually what are called glycine-gated chloride channels, which means glycine is not acting in a biochemical way. It's not participating in any biochemical reaction. It's actually acting as like a trigger lock, as a gatekeeper, to keep those gates more open. When the glycine-gated chloride channels, also known as glycine receptors, are kept open enough chloride will naturally diffuse in to keep up that polarization, that voltage. And so you don't get activated into the inflammation mode, into the M1 mode unnecessarily.
And if you're new to the topic of glycine, I want to share some truths that are very important for you to know. So Dr. Brind and I have been doing many interviews and videos about glycine because he's been studying glycine for decades and has come to the realization that in addition to being important for proper sleep and acting as a calming neurotransmitter and a building for collagen, which aids the health of our gut, our hair, our skin, our nails, our bones, also given that it helps create creatine and glutathione, all of these important structural proteins in our body, also acts as a trigger lock for our macrophages or immune cells when it's in very high amounts that most Americans don't achieve today with diet. So this is Dr. Brind's major discovery. He has education in immunology and nutrition and obviously biochemistry, and he's one of the first researchers to put this together, that if we have very high levels of glycine, it stabilizes our immune cells and prevents what he believes to be this rampant unnecessary inflammation that so many of us are suffering from, who have stiff joints, aching and just swelling, whose bodies overreact to every little thing that comes around because we're not eating the whole animal anymore or the connective tissues in the bones where glycine is found. We're eating the muscle meat and then we're throwing the bones in the trash, and he thinks that's one of the biggest nutritional mistakes we've been making. Plus, if we're eating a lot of meat and protein, for our protein lovers out there, we actually deplete more glycine. This doesn't mean we shouldn't eat meat, we absolutely should, but we need to balance it with our glycine. Also, when we're overweight, we can interfere with our body's ability to produce glycine. So according to recent research, we only make about 2 to 3 grams per day. We're eating about 2 to 3 grams, but we need between 12 and 15 grams a day, which is leaving us with an 8 to 10 gram deficit every day. So I just wanted to add a few ways that you can fill this glycine gap if this is the first video I've ever seen with Dr. Brind and I. First is I love to do it through food, because you're not only going to get glycine, but you're also going to get a vast array of other nutrients in a form that our body recognizes and uses readily. My favorite options are Paleo Valley's bone broth protein powder, because it comes in chocolate, caramel, savory, unflavored, vanilla. You can suit any type of cooking you're doing. You can throw the savory in soups and stews and cook your ground beef with it. It is so versatile. You can also put the chocolate in your coffee, in water, or just milk and make a chocolate milk. So that's the way that I do it every day. You can also just do regular bone broth. You can add gelatin at 1.5 grams per tablespoon into water. You can add that into soups and smoothies. You can do collagen. It's a more highly processed version of bone broth protein powder, but it will contain glycine. You can also eat animal skin, fish skin, pork rinds, collagenous cuts, beef shank, oxtail, and then do some crock pot, tougher collagenous cuts every single week. You can also do supplementation. There's a lot of really cheap glycine supplements floating around the internet. I actually have a video where I go through them. I'll link to that below. You can also try Dr. Brind's supplement, which contains 8 to 10 grams of glycine in one fell swoop that is sweetened a little bit with erythritol, so you can add it to lemonade he makes every morning, or coffee, or tea. And then you can also get it from small amount from magnesium glycinate. You can also get some in glutathione, which contain N-acetylcysteine. And so those are other options, though they're smaller amounts, and you would not necessarily be filling the glycine gap if you went that way. So I just want to add a little context. Thank you for listening. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions around glycine, questions for Dr. Brind. We love them. Keep them coming. Again, thank you so much for watching.